Merci. Thank you, Brian. Merci. C'est un plaisir d'être ici ce matin. Je vais faire ma présentation en anglais, mais les questions en français ou discussions en français seraient la bienvenue après la présentation. So this is a wonderful opportunity to, very happy to be here. And what I would like to do this morning is present some of the research we've done on parents and some of the funding that we receive from Sport Canada, to do this research. So I have 10 minutes. I will spend 4 minutes talking about the research on parents and try to make a point about what we've done. And then I'll take about 6 minutes to talk about some of the work that we've done in terms of filling some of the gaps in terms of the research, or trying to do this. So, I'd like to start a little bit by giving you a little bit of a sense of what has been done on parents' research. And I kind of look at this study that was published in 2018. It was a citation analysis, and it just outlined the most 5 of the most cited papers on parents' research. And what I would like you to do is I would just like you to look at the title. You should look at them because I cannot see it. But I would like you to read those titles. And when you read the titles, there's something you should probably notice. So you look at the influence of the family in the development of talent in sport, parental involvement in competitive youth sports setting, parents' perception of child-to-parent socialization, young athletes' perception of parental support and pressure. So what is the study? What are generally the research that has been done on parents? And I think that's kind of one of the main points I want to make with this is we always look at parents in terms of how they're influencing the kids. So parents are there and we're trying to understand, and this is perfectly fine, and it's something we need to understand, but we're really trying to link parental behaviors, styles of parents, what parents do, whether it's negative or positive types of things, and how it relates to some outcomes in the kids. So really, we're interested in the kids' experience, which is wonderful, and we should be, but parents are kind of just one thing that we look at in terms of improving that experience for the kids. And when we look at, based on all these studies, basically what we can say is that mainly what we've been looking at and what we've been trying to achieve is trying to look at our parents, the role that they have in the socialization of young people in sport, and in terms of the impact that they have in terms of children's engagement and outcomes. And again, this is very broad, but children's engagement and outcomes in terms of skill acquisition, in terms of self-esteem, in terms of all these outcomes that we're trying to link with some kinds of parental behaviors, whether those behaviors or styles of parenting are positive or negative. And this kind of translates to a lot of research, lots of intervention and recommendation. And I just have a list again, and I'll give you that list. I'll just put it down. So that research has informed some evaluations of interventions that we do with parents. So sport organization so researchers are taking those and designing programs to help parents become better parents. So again, you can look at this and say, okay, yeah, that's great. And then we're evaluating these interventions, and we're adding to the sports system. We're adding to what parents need to do. And we try to educate them. We train them. Those are the things you need to do. So you can look at this, and then you can look here in that series, and this is not exhaustive. There's a lot more than this, but we, as researchers, we try to understand what is it that we should train and we should try to do. So what are the gaps in that types of research? What are the shortcomings? And again, that is things that we need to understand, we need to do. And I'm not but I'm, in terms of moving forward, what is it? What else do we need to understand in terms of parents' research and sport? And one of the things is that in all that work that has been done, very often parents are seen as problems, and not necessarily as contributor to the sports system. Like we are there to when we're teaching them things, this is what you need to do as a parent. And that's, if we want to avoid negative behaviors of parents, then and then somebody, it's like very often we don't really ask them what they would like or how they're seeing their demands and their responsibility in the sports system. So, I think what's important here is try to go a little bit from that superficial levels of behaviors and style of parenting and try to understand what are the responsibilities and the demands that they have. And if you are parents, you understand that if you have children, there are lots of things going on in the life of parents. And then sport is just one more of these things. So really trying to understand parents' motivation, their experience in the sports system. And stop adding, maybe not stop, but our reflex is always to add more things and add something else for them to do. So all this so that would be about my 4-minute marks, hopefully. Overall, the research mainly focused on the behaviors and role of parents to support their children's engagement in sport. So the research really considered the demands and responsibility of parents that impact their behaviors and roles. And I think that's an important point to make in terms of really trying to understand the experience that the parents have in the sport when their kids are involved in sport. So that is kind of where we wanted to go with some of the research and some of the work we've been doing, is trying to look at the demands and responsibility of parents, independent of the child, independent of what it caused to the child. So there's 4 studies that I would like to present very quickly. I'm just going to give you kind of the main punchline of each study. But these are all graduate students, so doctorate and students and master students that have done this work, and that have been supported by SCRI and by Sport Canada through this work. But we look here at 4 different things that parents do, independent of their kids, independent of how it impacts the kid. But parents are consumer of sport. They spend a lot of money. Parents are as spectators, parents as coaches, and parents as friends. So I'm just going to go and have a quick look at these studies and kind of give you the main point of each one. So the first one is Alex Murata. So he's a doctoral student in our lab. And what he did is he took basically a kind of a business kind of approach, a consumer approach to sport, and interviewed parents about all the investment and the resources that they're putting into sport. And really what came out of this from the parents' perspective is that parents invest time and money in their children's sport program, but unlike other purchases, they are not able to provide feedback on their investment, which could lead to stress and frustration. So basically, we're asking parents to put a lot of money into sport. And then there's not a lot of things in our life when you think about what you buy and there's always a way to provide feedback. I was going to say other things, but as you look at, there's always a way to give feedback and to make the product better and and there's an exchange. And in the sports system, it's like, well, you pay and you provide a lot of time, but there's not a lot of ways to provide that feedback. Another study is, this one is Neil Stradham. So what Neil did here, so he was a master's student. During COVID, he interviewed parents when sport was stopped. So when youth sport was stopped during COVID, he talked to parents trying to understand what were the kids missing. What were the kids missing from the experience of sport? So this was a great opportunity because there's not a lot of time where there's no sport, where it's completely stopped. So the kids were at home. So the parents were very proud. Oh, this is great. We go bike with the kids. And, for the first month, it was great. And then suddenly it was like, okay, well, I hope sport's going to come back soon. But one of the things that came out of this study that we were not expecting is that the parents miss the experience of getting along, going and watch their kids and getting along with other parents. There's an identity that they have through their kids. And that was a very important thing that they were missing during COVID. Suddenly, they don't have that group. They don't have that group of other parents that they can socialize with. And that's their circle of friends. So again, thinking about this from a sport perspective, what do we do to improve that kind of experience? The next study is, Mia Kurtz-Favreau, she's a master's student. And what she was interested here is to look at parents that volunteer as coaches. And again, there's a lot of, the sports system is running on parents that coach. And really what came out of this study, so she interviewed parents that had that dual role. And really what it felt from the parents' perspective is that there's not a lot that they can get and that they can access to be a better coach. So basically we see them still as parents that does this job, but there's very little that seems that they had access to. And again, I'm saying this and there's a lot of people here sitting here that say, yes, there's a lot. But that's how they perceive it. That they were, how do I deal with my kids on the team, and how do I kind of integrate everybody and make sure that everybody is included and feel that they're belonging. And the last scoping review here, the last study I'd like to present is this idea of co-participation. And so this is Haley Smith. She's a master's student, and she just did a scoping review on co-participation. And basically, when we look at parents, the role of parents have been looked at mainly in organized sport. So Haley is a mountain biker, one of our national athletes, and she learned how to do the sport with her dad, just biking, and never been in a very organized sport or organized. And I think that's a very important aspect of parenting that sometimes we forget. What do parents do outside of the sports system, outside of the organized sports system? So we kind of talk here, and it's not really teaching skills. It's just going out for a bike ride, or going surfing, or going to play golf or tennis, or just playing with your kid as a friend. And I think there's not a lot we know from that in terms of how it creates interest and how it triggers interest and fun in the kids so that they get involved maybe later on in more organized sports. So all this to moving forward, I think it's pretty much just a summary of the research here, but really trying to understand a little bit more the experience of the parents in terms of the responsibility, the demands that they have, the conflicting roles sometimes that they have, the process of child co-participation, and really trying to understand parents as a social group, where they exchange with other parents. And the last slide I have is to really, from sport organization, what can we do? What can sport organization do to help parents do this? And what I have here is really very obvious things, but things maybe that we need to be a little bit more explicit in terms of how we create that space for parents to provide and be a partner in the sports system. Regular feedback and communication, surveys, questionnaires to parents to try to get them to get a bit of feedback about what is your experience of sport. Online forums and community that could be developed in terms of social media where parents talk to each other and exchange those experiences. Parents mentorship programs in terms of more, if there's very kind of parents that have been around for a long time, they could help parents that are just coming into the system. Parents-coach partnership, I think that's an important one that I've been talked about a lot before, but making sure that coaches are open to communicate in terms of communication. It's not always, parents are not always there to complain, but just trying to understand what's going on in their life also. Video resources, I put that one down because all we see in terms of videos of parents is negative stuff. It's negative behaviors of parents. I think it could be nice to say, okay, when a parent does a good thing, why don't we put it on video and show it to everybody too? And the same idea with this one in terms of really reinforcing positive behaviors and recognizing those behaviors and highlighting them and putting them out there in terms of. So Thank you. Merci.
First of all, this is a wonderful meeting. It's one of my favorites, and I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm a little bit jet lagged. I've been teaching in Italy at the University of Calabria at the Teachers College, and so if I seem a little off, you know why. It's been a long 18-hour flight, and plus the jet lag. But I'm going to take a couple of seconds just to tell you a little bit about myself, because I think it's important so that you see what the research means to me. For example, in my community, I wear different hats, much like all of you. I'm a clinical psychologist on Sundays. I have a Sunday practice. Half of my patients are elite athletes that range from bowling, national bowling teams in the U.S. to baseball. They're all young, between, say, 9 years old and 29 years old. And my specialty clinically is neurodevelopmental disorders. To the research community, I do a lot of secondhand smoke research. I do a lot of screen time research, and mostly I do a lot of physical activity research. It's important to note these things simply because every day my life is different. I have a different viewpoint on things. If it's Sunday, I'm preoccupied with my patients, and during the week, it's about teaching. I teach policy and research methods at the doctoral level, and I teach neurodevelopmental disorders at the master's level in psychoeducation. So today, I'm going to talk to you about the benefits of sport and active leisure on school-age youth. It's longitudinal research, which is really fun. Because we use the Quebec longitudinal study. These are 2,000 boys and girls, so 1,000 boys and 1,000 girls that were born between spring 1997 and 1998. My kids are the same cohort. In fact, my kids were solicited for this study, and I was in conflict of interest, so they couldn't participate. But the fun part is, as my kids were growing, I was able to have a one-on-one experience of the whole parenting and developmental experience. And I was studying these kids at the same time. And the kids today are about 26, going on 27. First thing I want to talk about is the global pandemic, the real pandemic that's been going on for the last easily 15 years. There's been an important rise. I'm going to put it in a better context. When I started my career as a clinical psychologist, the need to see a psychologist for a young person was, let's say, 5% in the population. When you look at the research that's coming out, that's been coming out since it started around 2010, people started saying, what's wrong with these kids? There was a significant increase in negative emotion and in intolerance to negative emotion. Okay, we've always had negative emotion. It's not like everybody who has grown up has had difficult experiences, and they learn to rise from those difficult experiences. And that's, as a psychologist, I explain to people, that's great. You're developing a tolerance to negative emotion. It's just like the reward-based effort. Like when we make an effort lifting something heavy, we feel there's some kind of reward there. It feels rewarding somehow. It's the same experience that helps people become more and more resilient over time. It's just this global pandemic, it's happening everywhere. It's in Asia, it's in Europe, it's in Africa, everywhere, North America. We seem to think that it's a North American problem. We also seem to think that it's all about screens, but it started happening before screens. It actually I've been studying this for a little while now, and it's got a lot to do with the low birth rate. We have more dogs than we have children. And what happens is that these little precious, rare children that we have, no, don't do that. No, what? Don't. And what happens is that, all those experiences of scraping your knee and going, ow, and walking after that, and all those experiences of, back in my day, I'm as old as Tim Hortons. So, when you started walking, you'd walk 2 kilometers with your mother to go to the grocery store, and it was a normal thing. And, I'm still a walker. I did 35 kilometers in 2 days in Rome recently. So I'm still a good walker. Today, because of the low birth rate and because of the culture of protection that we have for our precious little children. And I'm not denying that they're not precious. All human beings are precious. It's just we need to put that in context. Let's not be ridiculous. We have more and more children, and this is completely unstudied, but I see it all the time. Take a look yourselves. You're going to be completely offended by the fact that we keep children in baby carriages until 5, 6, 7 years old. You'll see, I was in the United States. There was this child didn't have a disability, just didn't feel like walking. And I think the kid was about 9 years old in a baby carriage. And the parents were just pushing along. What does that do? That's anything beyond walking. The age of starting to walk, it's a wheelchair. We're putting a kid that's able into a wheelchair, and we're telling them, no, don't do anything. This whole culture creates this anxiety. And if you take that and you put that in context, you realize that, wow, sport has a really important role in sort of restructuring people's cognitions, because it's not just and the excellent example of that, the excellent laboratory for that is Paralympic sport and people with handicaps who they rise and so when we look at children who are young people who are doing sport, we realize that it's a lot more than, I just want my kid to be active because, I want them to have a healthy lifestyle. It's got to do with learning a lot about making an effort and developing a tolerance to negative emotion and saying, no, I can grind against this. I could do this. And so I'm going to just go to the next slide and tell you that what I did with my team. I have a wonderful team of students. I'm blessed, man. Am I blessed? I run a very small shop, and they're all fantastic. What we do is we took the kids from this birth cohort, and we created naturally occurring trajectories of participation in sport between ages 6 and 10. So you have some kids whose parents and kids, of course, that cooperated and were interested in it, got into a sport. And you have another group of kids so we call those the consistent participators. And then we have the other group of kids who inconsistently or rarely participated in sport. And one of the important things about this research is that, before this particular project, it was very difficult to find compelling evidence, the kind that it's hard to shoot down. That said, everything was pointing in that direction, but there's always somebody, the cynic. But we control. I was trained by an economist, so they just train you in OCD when it comes to statistics. Excuse me if there's an economist here, but and so the kind of techniques that we used are very, very stringent statistical models with the longitudinal study, and what we found was participating consistently in sport between ages 6 and 10 years old brought beautiful outcomes for kids by age 12. And we have stretched out that research. There's some results that we're publishing on age 15 as well. But basically what we're looking at are increases in achievement orientation, increases in academic performance, decreases in anxiety symptoms, diminished ADHD symptoms for girls, especially because girls are less identified when it comes to ADHD. And as a result, they're less, if you're not identified, nobody's going to give you an intervention, right? And so sport plays a role because it's sort of like a hidden or, serendipitous intervention that just happened, that people didn't realize. And so there are benefits for girls in sport. And then there's also the issue of classroom engagement, having that sense of flow in class. Excuse me, doing what you're supposed to be doing in class. It's the business of being in class. And what we saw is that the kids who participated consistently in sport, they had a better tendency to have better classroom engagement, which not only is doing what you're supposed to be doing at your desk, but also relating to others and relating to the adult who's the teacher. Now, these are all things that you learn in sport. And, when I come back to the idea of the concept of developing a tolerance to negative emotion, it's extremely meaningful because a lot of the things that we do when we're little kids, the first time we do them, there might be a little bit of negative emotion because it's hard. You're learning how to multiply or you're learning how to divide or, there's algebra and then there's other stuff that comes along. All these things are experiences that are very, very influenced by these successful experiences in a sport where it's a game, but there's cheering on, there's adults structuring. So this is very beneficial. And I just want to say that our next project is going to be very exciting. We're going to be looking at all kinds of influential factors that play a role in opportunities for participating in sport. We're going to start looking at early movement in early childhood, and we're looking at temperament. We're looking at maternal mental health in particular. I have Kianush here. There she is, my doctoral student who's looking at maternal depression, which is a very important preoccupation in my lab, because if you have a mother who doesn't have enough energy, your chances of participating in sport or even just having physical activity are extremely limited because she just doesn't have enough energy. And so that's another aspect that we're going to be looking at. But I think the most important aspect that I want to really bring out in this particular project is also the aspect of it's going to be gender-based. There's no more research in my lab that occurs that treats gender as a neutral variable. We have boys, we have girls that are identified in this because it's a longitudinal study that I had no control over because it was done at a time where the university and people they controlled how the data was collected. But at least I have two classifications, and I get to sort of stratify and see how things are going. Because with the results we got for ADHD, which I found very promising because it identified the benefits for girls. So I guess I'm going to stop there. But before I do, I just want to say that we're also, this research that I did brought on research with Marc Tremblay, who's a great collaborator. Probably a lot of people know Marc. We're doing Sunrise together. We're looking at early childhood movement opportunities. Once again, I have a big preoccupation. I use the word opportunity because, movement is sport. It's all got to do with opportunity, whether it's, your individual characteristics or your parents' characteristics, their mental health, your mental health, whether you grew up in in a context or a culture or a subcategory in the community that makes it hard to have an opportunity. All these issues have a lot to do with, access to movement. So I just wanted to say that. And I want to thank all my colleagues and my students for taking a lot of the leadership in this. The way I run my lab is I'm there for the inspiration, but then after that, everybody's developing their excellence, and I'm very, very proud of my people. And I just want to thank the Indigenous population of Canada for allowing me to be an uninvited guest in Laval, Quebec, Canada. So thank you very much.
Topic of this talk is to discuss the influence that adolescent sport participation has on adult outcomes. And adult outcomes will most specifically talk about physical activity and mental health. Now, much of the work I'm presenting today is anchored in the generally accepted notion that multi-sport participation is favorable to early sport specialization in terms of promoting better physical activity levels later on, a lower risk of burning out a sport or risk of injury, and so on. Now, to support these claims, our group conducted a quite extensive literature review and tried to identify where the evidence supporting these claims was coming from. And actually, what we found was that there's actually little in the literature to support this generally accepted notion. There are some studies that do talk about this topic, but the quality or level of evidence was not quite there. So we thought, well, we have the data, let's explore this a bit further. Now, the data we have is from the MATCH study. So big thanks to SCRI and the Sport Participation Research Initiative from Sport Canada to support this project. So the project consists of, in 2011, we recruited 929 participants. They were in grade 5 or 6 at the time, so between the ages of 10 and 12. And we surveyed those participants 3 times per year throughout their school years, so for up to 8 years, which led to up to 24 survey cycles collecting information on their sport participation, their physical activity levels, potential determinants of those behaviors, as well as potential outcomes. We resurveyed the same participants again when they were becoming emerging adults, and we did that. At this point, we recollected data 3 times among those emerging adults. So this provides us with tons of data, something that's quite unique to this data set. I don't think there's any other data set out there that allows to really explore and understand how the behavior changes over the crucial years of adolescent development. So you'll understand with all those data, it won't be possible to talk about all of the findings, all of the results coming out of the study, the MATCH study, but here are some key findings relating to the question of, how does adolescent sport participation relates to future adult outcomes. So we did our due diligence. We did explore the natural development of sport and physical activity participation during those crucial years of adolescence. And obviously, you saw those figures moving quite quickly on the slide. That's purposely to display that we've analyzed this from all sorts of different angles. And what is the key messages? What are the key messages coming out of those studies? Is that it is true that physical activity and sport participation on average decreases during adolescence. But that is an average concept. It is not everyone that displays a decline in their sport and physical activity participation. And that's important to retain, because we tend to focus on just the negative side of things and forget that there are individuals out there who do display quite adequate level of sport and physical activity participation throughout the adolescent years. We've also observed that to characterize sport and physical activity participation during those important years, we should not do it with only one variable. So previously, and we did that ourselves as well, but most other studies or all other studies tried to characterize what happened with sport and physical activity participation by using only one variable, one characteristic. And we found with various sort of analyses that we need at least three variables to appropriately characterize this behavior. So we need to have at least representation of overall engagement in physical activity. And this is better done with a measure of moderate to vigorous physical activity engagement. We need representation of involvement in organized sports as well as engagement in unorganized physical activities. Now, with these three characteristics, we are capable to identify at 5 general patterns of sport and physical activity participation during the adolescent years. So we have a group of individuals that fall into a category of non-participants. These are people who, throughout adolescence, simply display or report no participation in sport or physical activity. Then we have a group that represents about a third of our participants who were initially somewhat physically active. They had low to moderate physical activity levels and sport participation levels, but these dropped quite rapidly, so much so that by the mid-teens, these dropouts were no longer physically active. Then we have a group that remain active throughout most of the adolescent years, and they did so by engaging in organized sports only. Then we also had a group that were active throughout adolescence and did so exclusively through engagement in unorganized physical activities. And finally, a group of about 15% of our sample that were active throughout adolescence and did so by taking part in all sorts of different organized sports and unorganized physical activities. Now, how do these patterns relate to future physical activity levels? What we found was that the later two groups, the adolescents with experience in unorganized physical activity, whether it was exclusively unorganized physical activity that they reported or engagement in all types of physical activity. So those were individuals that reported the highest levels of physical activity in emerging adulthood. But mind you, this coincided with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it is possible that because those people had more experience taking part in physical activities that did not require an organized setting, a fixed schedule, access to a specific infrastructure, because they had experience with unorganized physical activity participation, they were able to apply those strategies and remain active when they were emerging adults. We are not sure what would have been the results in a normal non-pandemic context. Something else that we tried to do was to identify determinants of belonging to any of those trajectories. And so one of the important characteristics that we found was that individuals in the non-participants, the dropout, and the active, but only through organized sports groups, displayed lower feelings of competence in relation to their ability to be physically active. That is in early adolescence. But what's more is that these three groups displayed declining levels of feelings of competence throughout adolescence. So what this tells us, and other studies have suggested similar results, what this tells us is that if we want to retain participants in a given activity, doesn't matter what activity it is, what sport it is, we need to find ways for those individuals to feel as if they are competent in that activity. Otherwise, the moment people feel that they are no longer competent or not competent in that activity, chances are they will simply drop out of that sport or physical activity. We observed as well that individuals who had more exposure to sport participation during adolescence later on presented higher levels of positive mental health. We were interested in finding out through which sort of mechanism this occurred. And one of the findings that we observed, and yes, again, this measure of positive mental health was in adulthood. One of the mechanism we noted was that adolescents who had more experience with sport participation, when they emerged as adults, were using physical activity as a coping strategy to deal with stress. And that was stress related to all sorts of different factors, but most particularly stress related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And because of this coping strategy, which was rated as one of the most effective coping strategy among a list of about 25, I think, different strategies, physical activity was rated as one of the best strategies to deal with stress. And this relationship explained part of the reasons for which sport participation during adolescence leads to better positive mental health in adulthood. So what to retain from all of this? First, that to appropriately represent adolescent physical activity trajectories, we need to take into account engagement in moderate to vigorous physical activity, involvement on organized sports, as well as involvement in unorganized physical activities. By accounting for those three characteristics, we can identify different patterns of sport and physical activity participation throughout adolescence. And those patterns are highly related to outcomes at adulthood that include physical activity levels in adulthood, as well as mental health. Now, these were just some of the few results coming out of the MATCH study. But if you're interested in finding out more, we have a website. Our lab's website is impactslab.com. So if you go on that website, you'll find that we present lots of our study results, and we present them in summarized infographics, which are quite easy to understand. We also promote some of those results or present some of those results on our various social media platforms. So you can follow us there as well. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great conference.
Just to kick off the Q&A, I'm going to open it up to the room in a moment. I just wanted to riff a little bit on two words that I think are really timely and important that Deborah mentioned earlier this morning, which are so what. We've learned a lot. There's a lot of tremendous insights. There's a tremendous amount of data on participation and outcomes and everything else. I think the question is what happens now? What happens next? If you're a researcher in the room, what questions does this generate? What are the implications? If you're a practitioner in the room, what can we do about it? Because that's are we changing? Are we improving? Are we using this to do better together in light of the theme? And if you are one of the many people who wear multiple hats in this room, I appreciate you, and let's have a bit of a dialogue. So first in the room, let's take a couple questions, and so at the back first.
Thank you for your presentations. I'm Katie Meisner from the University of Waterloo. So I'm going to put on my multiple hats as a community sport researcher and also a sport parent and direct a question to Jean. Thank you for your presentation. That all resonated a lot with me in my many hats. I'm curious what knowledge mobilization you've been able to do with the data that you've got and with the findings in terms of communicating that back to our local clubs, and how can we use this really important information about how the various roles that parents have, and what can the clubs actually be doing with that? And have you had any success so far communicating that back? And any tips and tricks you can give to our local clubs would be great.
Well, I think I'll be very honest. We've kind of we're in the middle of all this. So in terms of transmitting this, we're working with partners and with the clubs that were, and I think the main message to the clubs is, like the last slide I presented, really open the line of communication and really have a system and a process that allows good communication between parents and everybody within the sport organization. And I think the other big thing to me that came out of all this is sometime as researchers, we always want to do more and we always want to add stuff, but it's almost like subtract stuff, like get things a little bit, and I think to me that's kind of an important message is we're always putting more and more, and we want parents to do more. And so I think understanding where they're coming from, the demands that they have, the responsibility that they have, and really trying to make sure that there's good communications.
Thank you. So from the Zoom room, we have another question for Dr. Cote. So in your studies, did you guys notice, you and your graduate students notice any major trends or anything coming out of the socio-demographic data? So this participant wants to know if parents that were spoken to were majority Anglophone, white presenting, Euro-Canadian. What was the socio-demographics, if there were any that you picked up on there?
Yes, all that. They were very, kind of representative of the youth sport literature, which is very white, high socioeconomic, middle class. Yes. So we have not been very good at looking at parents that are in other kinds of demographic.
Hi, yeah, quick question. I was curious if any of the research was really sport specific. For Dr. Cote again. If you found like certain sports provided more parents with, shall we say, robust feedback, whether that was maybe sports that maybe were a bit more aggressive or team sports versus individualized sports, which parents had the most to say, or did you notice a trend? Because I've heard from quite a few people that hockey parents seem to be the ones that have the most to say. And I was just curious if there's anything you noticed like that.
So the first study that I presented, so Alex Murata, the doctoral student, so he's doing his doctorate on hockey. So it was all hockey parents, but the COVID study was kind of mostly soccer and volleyball. So, but yes, I agree that the parents, Alex is like he's doing other studies now following this up, but this consumer idea is kind of an interesting one in terms of especially the cost of that the parents put into the investment that the parents put into hockey, and in his study the very little input that they can have into what's going on, and when there's input, it's always perceived as, oh, they're complaining, oh, they're And we tried, a lot of time they tried to put them aside. So mostly team sports that we've looked at.
Yeah, thanks so much for the presentations. I have one for Dr. Pagani. You had one slide, and I took a picture of it because I'm speaking as a parent here. The sports from ages 6 to 10, you found positive outcomes at age 12. You mentioned in your presentation consistent involvement. Can you, how is that defined, and any other information you can share there?
Thank you for the question. Basically, every year in the longitudinal study, we asked the parents if the child participated in an organized sport. And we asked questions regarding that. And so we were able to sort of create a classification of consistent versus inconsistent participation over time. It's, the lowest hanging fruit because of secondary analysis, of a big data set that's been going on for a long time. But it's very interesting to have been able to create those trajectories.
Professor Cote, I was very interested in the summary of the study. You mentioned sport as a social vehicle for parents in terms of social opportunity. I'm most involved as a practitioner around the sport of basketball in the city of Ottawa. And one of the things I've seen is that basketball is a tremendous connector across socioeconomic and cultural lines. And so I end up helping, as do many others, people from completely different socioeconomic backgrounds with things like job hunts or accessing resources, et cetera, And I'm curious, to what degree are there examples? Because I get no impression from the city of Ottawa, and if you look at their anti-racism study, it talks about a problem with youth programming for racialized tends to be very siloed. That basically, if you keep kids all in kind of a community league in a priority neighborhood, you're kind of robbing of the opportunity to have social interactions that transcend that. And so I'm curious, is anyone sharing this information? Are there any good examples of municipalities in Canada where they have a good practice? I mean, is there anyone here from the city of Ottawa? It's walking distance.
So I
from
guess I can say anything if there's no one here. I'm not sure. I don't think I can answer your questions in terms of, but the one thing I can say though, in that one study we did with hockey parents was that there was some benefits. There was a lot of benefits for the parents to get together. So, one of the parent is, I don't know, one of the parents is a lawyer and then helps with the other parents and then helps. So there was a lot of interactions, but a lot of it was kind of beneficial for the parents to have that group and to be that group. And they really, so I think it's kind of an interesting thing in terms of interactions. And some of the parents, a few of them didn't have anything to do with that group either. So it wasn't the majority of them, but there's a few of them that in the group that kind of, I don't really benefit from hanging out with those parents. And I go watch my kids, but I don't hang out with them.
Thank you. I think we have time for about 3 more questions. So we're going to start over here, and then we're going to take one on Zoom. All right. All right, we're going to try and squeeze in 4.
Okay, I will take the platform then. Thank you, as long as I know that everybody's getting their chance as best we can. So first, I want to commend all the speakers. It was wonderful, and you're all doing such wonderful work, all very different work, and thank you for that. So Mathieu, it's Jessica Fraser-Thomas. I'm sorry that we don't get to see you here today, but thank you so much for this really interesting continued line of work. So I have 2 quick questions because I think they have quick responses, and so I'll hit them to you both at once. But the first one was just a really interesting finding that I think we all should be talking a little bit more about. And that's that middle group, the 27% of sport participants or that were involved in sport participation were not in adolescence, were not involved in emerging adulthood. So that I think is what I heard, which is really interesting. I wanted to know if that was single sports primarily or multi-sports primarily, because I know that's how you started out, and I wasn't sure if that was made clear. And the second finding that I was really interested in following up on was that sport participation in adolescence was tied to more positive mental health through using physical activity as a platform to do that, which almost seems in contradiction to the previous finding. So I'm wondering if you can speak to those 2 points. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jessica. Those are really good questions. And thanks because it allows me to talk more to those points. didn't go into much details about them. So the first question about those 5 different profiles of sport and physical activity participation. Yes, there's a large group of participants, about 27%, that did fall into a category that we labeled, I think you're referring to this group, the physically active through exclusively or mostly organized sports. So this group, there was a variety of individuals into this group. They all engaged in organized sports with very little engagement in unorganized physical activity. For the most part, these participants engaged in a single sport, not that they did not necessarily fit the definition of early sports specializers, which would require for them to take part in the very same sport throughout the year and engage in this sport through a large level of commitment for developing as a elite athlete in that sport. But we did identify that they were mostly single sport participation because they took part in a single sport at a time, not necessarily the same sport throughout the year. It could have been soccer during the summer, hockey during the winter, but at any given time, they were taking part in a single sport. That was one of the largest group, and they did experience they did maintain a pretty steady level of physical activity participation throughout adolescence, but yes, in adulthood, they no longer had as high levels of physical activity engagement. So I think that addresses your first question. The second question was about the mechanism linking sport participation in adolescence to positive mental health. So yes, we did observe this relationship. So more sport participation, and actually it appeared to be stronger for team sport participation. So more sport participation during adolescent years, in particular team sport participation, seems to provide individuals with a skill set that whenever they face a stressful situation, they can turn to physical activity to cope with that period of stress. By doing so, they do become physically active for that moment to deal with stress. Doesn't necessarily translate into attaining the physical activity guidelines. So that's why we may not have observed that relationship that you're talking about, where we observed in the previous research, as you pointed out, that those adolescents who exclusively took part in sports during adolescence were no longer as active as emerging adults. Doesn't mean that they do not use physical activity as emerging adults to deal with stress. Actually, our other study does suggest that they do use physical activity in some situations, but on average, they may not attain as high levels of physical activity when they are emerging adults. I hope that addresses the question.
Thanks, everyone, for vouching for me. I was just hiding over here. Dr. Pagani, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. My name is Ben. I'm a research coordinator from MLSC. My question, your presentation really resonated with me. I really love the idea of this culture of protection and how that's led to so much vulnerability and depression. I guess one of my questions, I have two questions. The first question was, I know you said in a lot of your research you stratified with gender. I was wondering if you have looked into different sociodemographic statuses like underprivileged youth and how maybe sport has led to academic success. And also with your neuro background, have you looked into any cognitive development in associations with all these outcomes that we're seeing? So I don't know what order you want to answer the question.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. We have, first I'm going to tell you that about 30 years ago, I supervised a master's student with a very disadvantaged population. It was a longitudinal study on the poorest boys in Montreal. It was a sample of 1,167 boys. And this master's student found fantastic results preventing delinquency in a population that chances are very, very high when the child reaches age 15 that they've engaged in some antisocial behavior. So that sort of set the stage for me to be very, very interested in sport back in the day. In this particular data set, I inherited this project from Fred Briere, who passed away. I didn't have time to mention it, but Fred was the lead researcher on this project. He got very sick in the first year, and he died during the pandemic, not of the pandemic, but he died of cancer. But Fred had a very specific, his ideas were, I had to kind of follow what he left me. And so the next submission to SSHRC has a big component on growing up in disadvantage, different kinds of disadvantage, because, sometimes it's not monetary. Sometimes it's not financial hardship. Sometimes it's mental health hardship. Other times it's having a parent with, other challenges, or having yourself some, challenges. So this coming research is going to not only focus on boys and girls as separate entities that experience risk and protective factors differently because of biology and because of social expectations, but we're also going to look into all these specific individual and family factors, because I think that the next level of so what is speaking to these populations and encouraging social policy to encourage access and give opportunities for these kind of things.
We knew this panel would draw a lot of question, a lot of interest, and it did not disappoint. So a huge thank you, Brian, for moderating. Mathieu joining us from Zoom. Jean and Linda, thank you so much.